and fall of an empire. I know it's been a long time since we've seen each other. Hopefully I'll be back soon. That's all I got to say. But for this week, you're going to have to watch a couple of presentations and just listen to my voice. So you should have a note sheet in front of you. And the first thing that we're going to do is do a map. Just like we did with Greece, it's important to know the location of things when we're talking about Rome. So on your note sheet, you'll notice that there is this big border line. That is really the border of the Roman Empire. We got a couple of dots. Those represent cities that you need to know. These blue lines here represent two rivers that you need to know. But before we do any of that, let's look at areas within the Roman Empire. Now, you may have to pause this occasionally just so you make sure you have everything that you need on your sheet. Up here is Britain. Yes, Britain started off as a Roman colony. In fact, London was a Roman city. Londonium, it was called. And then this is Gaul right here. Gaul is now modern-day France. Spain was a province in ancient Rome. And then over here to the east, a very important area, Judea. Judea was the traditional homeland of the Jewish people. It was controlled by Rome. And it would also be the place where later Christianity would develop. Now let's look at some of the water areas. The blue line at the top of the Italian peninsula, that's the Po River, right below the Alps mountains. And then the most important river to Romans was the Tiber River. That is the river on which the city of Rome itself was built, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then, of course, the Mediterranean Sea is going to be very important. The Romans are going to control that sea. They're actually going to rename the sea for a while, as you'll see in a little bit. And over here, this lake, which is actually a lake because it's enclosed by land, that is known as the Black Sea. It was so large, early peoples called it a sea. Now let's look at the dots, the cities. The most important one, of course, the one on the Tiber River, that is Rome. And across the Mediterranean Sea in northern Africa, you'll see another dot. That is Rome's biggest enemy, at least for a while. That's the city-state of Carthage. Carthage is going to be a huge sea power, and Rome is going to challenge them, and Rome is going to win, as you're going to see in a moment. And then over by the Black Sea, you'll see there's a dot there. That is the city of Byzantium. It will become the city of Constantinople later in the Roman Empire, and today it is known as Istanbul. In fact, I think there may be a song that tells that story. Anyway, over in Judea, we have a couple of cities, Damascus, which today is in Syria, and then, of course, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is basically the center of the Jewish world, and it will become the center of the Christian world as well during the Roman Empire. Now, just to make sure you have all of this stuff, you may want to pause it right now before we continue. Okay, now let's look at the founding of Rome. There's Rome right there on the Tiber River, and there were a lot of different groups of people that lived on the Italian peninsula. All right, the Italian peninsula, very fertile. The Tiber River, brought fresh water down from the mountains. It emptied and provided access to the Mediterranean Sea. So unlike ancient Greece, which was rocky and rugged and very hard to move between the city-states, Italy was a lot flatter and had a lot more fertile soil, great for growing crops like wheat. And being in the center of the Mediterranean, that was very important. The very first people who lived in the city of Rome were a group of people called the Latins. And that's the group that founded Rome. They're known as the first Romans. The language that the Romans would speak is Latin. And Latin is going to become one of the most important languages in the world today, even though no one really speaks it officially. It is the foundation of most of the European languages. It is still the official language of the Catholic Church. And in science, Latin is the base for all scientific names. Now, according to legend, and this is really weird, two brothers founded Rome. They were Romulus and Remus. And what was weird about Romulus and Remus is that they were abandoned by their mothers. Their mother, I should say. And they were raised instead by a wolf, a she-wolf. Now this story, all of the Romans told, it was a story that was passed down through the 1,000+ years that Rome existed. And here is a clip that talks about that story of Romulus and Remus.
Legends told that Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, twins who were cast into the wilderness to die. But the boys were said to be saved by a she-wolf who suckled them. They grew up like savages in the woods. When they returned to found the city of Rome, they were filled with the simple, ferocious spirit of their wolf mother. According to legend, Romulus and Remus then led their people to the bend in the river Tiber where she found them. There Rome was born. The year was 753 BC. But hardly had they founded the city than the two brothers quarreled over who should be king. It was left to the augurs to decide. Augurs were the priests of early Rome who divined the will of the gods. They studied the movements of birds, the weather, the entrails of sheep before making their pronouncements, known as the auguries. The augurs placed each brother on a hilltop, then waited. When birds flocked over Romulus, they knew he would be the first king of Rome. But Remus refused the augury, and the brothers fought. Romulus killed him. The first king of Rome, suckled by a wolf, bathed in his brother's blood, walked away furious and triumphant. It was a fitting augury for the bloodshed and strife that lay ahead.
This is a quote that I love. Culture is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Every culture has stories. Stories about their founding, stories about their founders, and these stories are told to kids. They're told throughout the culture. And these stories are stories that teach people about themselves. Now, in ancient Rome, when you were in school, you would have heard that story of Romulus and Remus over and over again. And of course, there's probably little truth to it. Two boys raised by wolves. But think about what this tells the Romans about themselves. Why were they raised by wolves? What characteristic do wolves have? When you look at the story of Romulus and Remus, them fighting, one of them killing the other. What does this story of Romulus and Remus tell us about Rome? Think about that a second. What does the fact that they were raised by wolves mean if you're a Roman? Well, think about it. Wolves are vicious. Wolves are strong. Wolves fight. Wolves are survivors. And that's what the Romans think about themselves. They see themselves as predators, as, people who are willing to fight and die for what they need. And that's really what Rome was. Rome was not necessarily a very pleasant place to live. It was very violent. If you remember from the packet when you were doing on Rome, with all of the Roman emperors who were killed during a period of time, Rome was a very violent place. And that is something that they themselves, identified. Think of the gladiator games and so forth. And so this story of Romulus and Remus tells us a lot about what it means to be Roman. Now, in 509 BC, the Romans had a king. And the king was a foreign king, an Etruscan king. And the Romans themselves rebelled against that king, and they established a republic. Now, this is really important because a republic is a type of democracy in which citizens elect representatives to rule for them. That's what a republic is. Sound familiar? Yes, we have a republic. Our republic is based on the republic of ancient Rome. They didn't have a direct democracy. They had a republic in which people elected representatives. In Rome, citizenship with voting rights was granted only to free-born male citizens. But citizenship was really important to the ancient Romans. And so, in ancient Rome, there were basically two classes. Well, three classes of people, really. Slaves made up the bottom class, but they were not really seen as a class. They were just slaves. Up at the top were the patricians. These guys were the wealthy landowners who held most of the power. They're the ones that ran the government. They're the ones that made the rules for the most part. And then the plebeians were everyone else. They were the common farmers. They were the artisans. Artisans are people who make things. They were the merchants. They made up the majority of the population. Now, plebeians were citizens, so they could vote, but they couldn't rule. They had really no say in the workings of government, and this proved to be a problem. A problem that almost caused the Roman Republic to be destroyed because the plebeians and the patricians basically went to war against each other. The plebeians wanted fairness. The plebeians wanted a voice in government. And so they finally did that. In 451 BC, the Roman Republic put together a series of laws called the Laws of the 12 Tables. Now, a table is a tablet, stone that you could put on a wall, and that's what they did in the Forum. They put this out in the open. 12 tablets with laws that hung in the Forum for all to see. And basically, this law is very important to us because it established an idea that is still important to us, that everybody has equal protection of the law. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, the law applies to everybody in the same way. And everyone has a right to use the law. That's what due process is. And so this became the basis for later Roman law and our law too. In fact, most law in the Western world can be traced to the law of the 12 Tables. This republic is not a lot like ours. We have a system based on balance of power, a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch. The Roman system is based on a balance of interest, and they have elements of a kingship, an aristocracy, which is ruled by wealthy people, and then a democratic side. All right, we don't need to know everything about this. Okay, it's pretty complex, this whole system. But up at the top, you've got two councils. These councils direct the government. They provide leadership, and they can only serve for one term. And then the lawmaking branch is the Senate. All right, the Senate is going to be really important. The Senate was made up of the richest members of society, the patricians. And then the Democratic side. This was the assembly of tribes. These were the people who voted yes or no on laws. They're the ones that provided the soldiers and so forth. They couldn't make laws, but they could approve laws. The most powerful, the most important, and this is the thing you need to remember the most important and powerful part of the Roman system was the Senate, right there in the middle. And it's the rich people who run the government. They pass laws that favor them the most. So we took the idea of the Senate and we put it in our own system that we have today in the United States. So the Senate is the most important part of the Roman system. Now, Rome grew rich on trade. And throughout the Mediterranean, because they have access to the Mediterranean, they established many trade routes. But Carthage, the city across the Mediterranean, was also a trading power. And soon Rome and Carthage are going to go to war because Carthage sees Rome as a threat and Rome sees Carthage as standing in the way of their greatness.
Carthage, a land of opportunity founded more than 2,000 years ago. Driven by wealth, power, and ambition, these pioneers built an empire that dominated the Mediterranean world for over 600 years. By developing some of the ancient world's most groundbreaking technology, both at home and in the far reaches of the known world. The centerpiece, a massive harbor that held hundreds of warships, the vanguard of antiquity's most formidable navy.
These ships are coming up fast. People see them coming. Carthage is here.
But storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Carthage finally had an enemy that could match it blow for blow. A superpower like the world had never seen. Rome.
The Romans saw Carthage as a spear pointed at the very heart of Rome.
In this to-the-death struggle, only one could emerge victorious. The other would be reduced to rubble.
So the wars that Carthage and Rome fought were called the Punic Wars. And there were basically 3 wars between them. And these wars lasted for over 100 years. All right, we're not going to go into every war, but one thing that is very certain is that there were times that Rome almost lost, but in the end, they pulled out victory. Rome would win every one of the Punic Wars, every one of the 3, even in the face of a military genius known as Hannibal. Hannibal is famous for attacking Rome, and he did so with a huge army and also elephants. Yeah, he used elephants in war. This is pretty cool.
Almost as famous as Hannibal himself are the elephants he used in battle. These were the Carthaginians' terror weapon. Small numbers of elephants could have a massive effect. It's not hard to imagine why. The sight of charging elephants would strike fear into any right-thinking person facing them.
Elephants are mainly terror weapons. They scare the living daylights out of the enemy, make them run away. They're big, they're grey, they make strange noises, they're smelly, they frighten people. There's something that no one's ever seen before, particularly for a Roman. You've never seen an animal that's that sort of size, and you certainly haven't seen one bearing down on you in great numbers. So all it has to do is turn up and come charging towards you, and you're already pretty scared.
You cannot imagine how fast an elephant can be if he goes wild. The most people, they think an elephant is very slow and because he's so big. He's like 40-45 kilometers per hour. He can move very, very fast. So I think it's a very effective weapon in the war.
The elephants used by the Carthaginians were a smaller, now extinct breed of African elephant from the foothills of North Africa's Atlas Mountains. the deployment of the battle elephant wasn't particularly subtle. Immediately before the battle, the elephants were first plied with wine.
I can imagine he used some alcohol, because elephants, they like alcohol, like beer or wine or something like this. They will drink it, and it's like the effect is like for people. Some people are very shy, so they drink some alcohol, and they're the biggest fighter in the world. And this isn't with an elephant. You can turn the character with alcohol.
The elephants would then be prodded in their ankles. In their inebriated state, this would have made them as mad as hell. Then it was simply a matter of pointing them at the enemy and charging, and hanging on.
The elephant is very big and very large, and it's just going to trample its way through any formation. So they're very formidable. They can break up particularly dense bodies of troops, and cavalry, they're just frightened by terrifying the horses.
Hardly a weapon of surgical precision, the idea was that they would batter the enemy, breaking their lines.
When an elephant attacks people, he will use his whole body. So, first of all, they will roll the trunk in. They get down with the head, and they attack with the trunk and hit very hard. If they have tusk and use the tusk, you will maybe already be dead by a hit from a tusk. And the feet, they go on and smash everything under the feet. They go like tomato juice.
However, there was a fundamental flaw to this weapon system. They were inherently unpredictable.
The problem is that they're temperamental creatures. They really don't naturally do this sort of thing, and they don't want to be in a noisy, colourful, swirling battle.
By and large, if you have a 5-ton fighting machine, it is better if it isn't temperamental, drunk, and knows who its enemies are. Since running amok is something an elephant can also do very well.
He don't know the difference between Roman people and Carthaginians. They only learn to attack people. And it don't matter what, black, white, yellow, green, they go and attack everything.
Now, in the Punic Wars, Rome utterly defeats Carthage. In the Third Punic War, they go into Carthage, they destroyed the city, they killed all of the men, they enslaved the women and children. And then they basically tore down the city brick by brick. And then in a symbolic gesture, they took wagons filled with salt. And they put salt all across the land. Salted land cannot grow anything. And it's like the Romans were telling the Carthaginians that you are done. We have wiped you off the face of the earth. Some historians call this a genocide in an age before that word was even used. So after the defeat of Carthage, Rome controlled a lot of land. And in fact, they thought themselves so important that they renamed the Mediterranean Sea, and they called it Mare Nostrum, which in Latin means our sea. How about that, huh? The Romans are basically saying, yeah, the Mediterranean Sea, we're not going to call that anymore. We're going to call it our sea because we control it. That just tells you a little bit of how powerful Rome got and what they thought of themselves in the process. As Rome is growing, generals are becoming very important. One of the biggest generals at the time was Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar. I don't know why I always say that. It's just hard. Julius Caesar was a general who conquered Gaul. He was a general who went all the way to Britain and became really, really famous among the Romans. He wrote books about himself. He would use the media, the news, to spread information about himself to gain the public's attention. He was so popular that by 45 BC, he was named dictator of Rome. Yeah, that's how much the people liked him. They named him dictator. And so when he became dictator, he made the Senate larger. He said, I'm giving more democracy. However, he filled the seats of the Senate with his supporters so he could get things done. He did extend citizenship to people outside of Rome itself, the city of Rome. And he actually pardoned his defeated opponents, and he treated them nicely. But, and here's the big but, Caesar also did a couple of things that made people upset. Now, this is not one of them, although some people are like, who does this guy think he is? He changed the calendar. Before Julius Caesar, the Romans had a calendar that was 10 months. And so we have Martius, which is March, Aprilis, which is April, Maius, which is May, Junius, which is June, and then Quintilis, which means the 5th month, Sextilis, the 6th, September, the 7th, October, the 8th, November, the 9th, and December, the 10th month. So what Julius Caesar did when he became the dictator is he made a 12-month calendar, and right there after Junius, he created the month of Julius, the month of July, because he made a month for himself. Well, that just made the rest of the months not match up with their name, but he did it anyway. He dedicated a month to himself. Another emperor, Augustus, will do the same thing. He'll come in and give us the month of August. So some people were like, who does this guy think he is, naming a month after himself? But that wasn't as bad as two other things that he did. And these two things frightened the you-know-what out of people. And the first thing he did this. He wore purple. That jerk. Can you believe it? He wore purple. Man, that just makes me so mad. Purple. Look around the room right now. You see anyone wearing purple? If you do, stay away from them. Because purple is an important color. Back in ancient Rome, the only people who wore purple were kings. Now remember, Rome doesn't have a king. Rome is a republic. Rome is a democracy. And now Julius Caesar starts going around wearing purple. And so now people are like, who does this guy think he is? Does he think he's a king? And that got some people in the Senate really worried that he was going to remain dictator for life, going to destroy the republic. Not only that, he did something else. He put his face on coins. Now, we're pretty used to having people's faces on coins. However, if you'll notice on our coins, we don't have people who are alive. All right? We've never put people's faces on our coins who are alive. Before this, in ancient Rome, they had gods and images, symbols of Rome placed on coins. But no, Julius Caesar comes around and puts his face on coins. And people are like, who does this guy think he is? This angered people so much that a group of people in the Senate began talking about getting rid of Julius Caesar. They conspired. They even got his best friend, Brutus, in on the conspiracy. And then on March 15th, 44 BCE, they did it. Led by Caesar's best friend Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, they surrounded Caesar when he came to the Senate, and they stabbed him some 40 plus times. It was a brutal stabbing. The senators surrounded Caesar, and each took their turns taking their sword and running it through the dictator. The last one to do it, supposedly, was his best friend Brutus. Caesar was laying there on the ground, bleeding profusely, and his best friend walked up to him and plunged that sword into Julius Caesar's chest. The dictator was no more. And so the conspirators came out and they admitted to doing it. They washed their hands in Caesar's blood. They went out to the crowd and said, yes, we did it. We did it because we wanted to save Rome. We loved Caesar, but we love Rome more. But there were people who were pretty upset with that too. And so what ended up happening is that a civil war broke out. And in the end, Julius Caesar's adopted son, Augustus, came to power, and he became the first Roman emperor. Some of the Roman emperors were good, some of them were bad, and some of them were messed up like you would not believe. And the death of Julius Caesar ends the Roman Republic and begins the Roman Empire. Rome now moved from a republic to an empire with one man now in charge. Augustus became the first Roman emperor in 31 BC. And then Romulus Augustulus was the last Roman emperor in 476 AD. So for the next 500 years, Rome is going to be ruled by emperors. Some of them were good, like Augustus. Some of them were, good, like Trajan, and Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. There were a lot of Roman emperors. They all put their faces on coins, just like Julius Caesar did. Julius Caesar is the first one to do it. Then you got Augustus, and then it goes all the way, down here. This is 500 years of emperors. Like I mentioned, some of them were good, but a lot of them were bad. Nero was one of the bad ones. And in fact, I really can't tell you everything that Nero did. Nero was emperor from 54 to 68 AD. He was assassinated, by his own guards. He killed his mother. He took a boy that he met and had him castrated and married him and treated him like a woman. He just executed people at will. He killed his mother. In fact, he tried killing his mother in various ways. He tried to kill his mother once by drowning her. He built a barge that he set to sink, and it did. His mother fell into the water, but she swam away. He did other, really cockamamie plans, but in the end, he had his mother strangled in her bed while she slept. Yeah. He is something else. Rome burned down during his reign, and a lot of people blamed him. Never trust a guy, if you'll notice, with the reverse beard. That's a Nero beard. You never want to do that. So Nero is an example of one of the ugly emperors. Now, in 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from Spain throughout the Mediterranean, through northern Africa, past Judea, and into what was at one time Mesopotamia. This is the largest Rome ever got. Now, the Roman period of time of expansion was known as the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana means Roman peace. But political and economic turmoil rocked the empire. Empires were repeatedly overthrown and assassinated. That's a political problem. And as you saw in the chart from the document packet, 26 emperors ruled in a 50-year period, and only one died of natural causes. And in order to support the government, they enacted high taxes, and this burdened the people and farmers. For poor farmers were forced to work and live on wealthy estates. The land became less fertile because it was over-cultivated, and this caused problems as well. Now, there were a couple of emperors who tried to stop this from happening. Constantine was a good one. Constantine ruled from 306 to 337. He's unique because he's going to be the first emperor to become Christian. He actually moved the capital of Rome to Byzantium and then named it after himself, and it became Constantinople. What began happening with Rome is that Rome became weakened, And then other people began seeing their opportunity to take over Rome. And so Germanic tribes, people from northern Europe, began attacking Rome. And you had groups of people called the Huns, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. Oh, the Vandals were so destructive. They came into Rome and they burnt Rome down. They destroyed temples and buildings. In fact, our word vandalize comes from the fact that the Vandals invaded and destroyed Rome. Now, this was one of the factors that caused the fall of Rome. And we could basically break the fall of Rome into 4 causes. You've got these causes on your note sheet. In regard to military causes, we have the Germanic invasions that weakened the empire. The Roman legions, that's the basic Roman army, they were weakened as well. You had people who were not loyal to Rome but loyal to generals that fought because they were being paid. And when the fighting got bad, they were less likely to fight. Social causes, Rome became very decadent. All right, there was an erosion of traditional values. The upper class only cared for themselves, and so they did whatever they could to hold on to their power at the expense of everybody else. And in Rome, in order to keep the people happy, they entertained them with bread and circuses. The Circus Maximus was a huge racetrack, and it was violent racing. And of course, the Colosseum was a place where they had gladiator games. And so the entertainment was designed to distract the people, and they spent a lot of money on that entertainment. And it only highlighted the problems that Rome had. Politically, the government became oppressive. The government became, very, oppressive of the people. There were corrupt officials. The empire was divided now into 2 parts. They had 2 emperors, one in the east and one in the west. And so therefore, it was hard to coordinate and control these large areas of land. And economically, heavy taxes were a burden. A lot of people moved out of Rome in order to find, economic opportunity elsewhere. So in the end, Rome fell. All right, Rome fell in what is known as 476 AD, when the city of Rome itself fell, and the last Italian Roman emperor left his throne, and Odoacer became the new emperor. And Odoacer was a German and not a Roman. And so this marks the end of the Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire didn't actually fall completely. Out here in the east, there was still an emperor in Constantinople. And this is not going to be the Roman emperor. They're going to call it the Byzantine Empire. And we'll be looking at that in a later unit. The eastern part of the empire will last another 1,000 years. And it was known as the Byzantine Empire. And it will eventually fall to the Turks in 1453. So that's, in a nutshell, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Now, why is it important? Well, there's a significance to Rome. There are 3 things that we need to remember what Rome gave us. First of all, here they are: law, language, and government. The law of the 12 tables and the idea that everybody is equal before the law, that comes from Rome. The Latin language, which is the foundation of our own language, it's the foundation of French, it's the foundation of Italian and Spanish. Language, the Latin language, is a very important contribution of the Romans to the Western world, and of course government. Their whole idea of a republic, that's the government that we have, and that's the government that a lot of countries have today. So equality before the law, the Latin language, and the idea of a republic is the lasting legacy of ancient Rome. If you have any questions about the packet, about the note sheet, please just go ahead and email me, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you guys very soon.